Good afternoon.
Hi there.
I'm impressed with the amount of people that are still in here, and the party is only in like an hour's time after this session, so thank you very much for attending. I'm sure this is probably your last session of the day. I'm really excited to be here again at VMworld talking about PowerCLI. Every year we come up here, we talk about PowerCLI, we go as deep as we think we can, and then the comments tell us, go deeper, we want to hear more, we want to get really deep dive in PowerCLI, learn more from you guys. So hopefully we've done that again this year. This is session INF5211, and we're going to talk to you about PowerCLI, what's new in the latest release, and also a deep dive into some of the harder subjects and maybe demystify some of those things. So this is the normal disclaimer side. I'm sure you've seen this 50 million times today. It basically says that I'm allowed to talk about anything I want right now, and you can't count on me delivering it.
Yeah.
Or words to that effect. So today we're going to be talking about our technical preview, or actually it's been released now. So 6.0 R2, we're going to be talking about what's new in PowerCLI. We're going to be talking about desired state configuration. A lot of you have used PowerShell. You're getting used to how PowerShell works. You will know that desired state configuration is a new feature in the latest version. We'll be showing you how you can use that with PowerCLI. We'll also be talking about some best practices, going into a bit of a deep dive there, and then we should have time at the end for questions. I would ask that you keep your questions till the end because they have microphones that they can bring around to you. It'll just make it easier for everybody else. So first of all, I want to introduce you to Luke Deakins, the man that needs no introduction. If you've ever used PowerCLI, you've definitely used his site. I know I've stolen his scripts on several occasions. If you haven't been to his site, make sure you bookmark it, luked.info. He has some great information on there. If you've ever raised a question in the communities, he's the guy that answers within about 3 seconds when he's asleep.
Yeah.
He's a PowerShell MVP, of course, and a vExpert for a long time now. And you can contact him on LukeD22 and thank him for all the scripts that he's ever written.
Thank you. No, thanks. Now, it is my great pleasure, but let me try to keep this short. Whoever used the VCheck tool in this room? Alan, have a look.
Thank you.
Now, this is the guy that started it all. In the meantime, it came on GitHub. It's a community project, but Alan is the one who started it all. Alan is, in the meanwhile, product manager for all the CLIs, if I say that correctly.
APIs, SDKs, and CLIs.
Everything, nearly. So Alan has a blog site of his own, beside the PowerCLI blog, where he contributes regularly as well. His own blog site contains quite a rich source of scripts that you definitely should be using in your day-to-day management of your vSphere environment. And you can find him on Twitter as Alan Renouf. Renouf is not French, let's that be clear, it's British, just to get rid of all the confusion that might happen there. Okay, who came into this room with the idea that we would be giving an introduction to PowerCLI? Oh, that's great. Oh, one at the end. We won't hold it against you. You can still leave the room and prepare early. It's not an introductory session, I'm afraid. What we did try to do in this artwork, which Alan made, well done, by the way, what we try to do is we try to list in a kind of playful way all the command lists, or most of the command lists that are available in PowerCLI nowadays. And there's quite a lot. I haven't counted them in 6R2. Do you have an idea?
I'd say over 500.
So have a look. I know when I started it was 67, if I'm not mistaken.
Wow, okay.
So the growth of this thing is enormous. So again, PowerCLI introduction, not in this session. The thing is quite simple. So this is my 1-minute summary of an introduction. You have the get commandlets, which is standard for PowerShell. With get, you retrieve the information. With new, you create information or objects. And with set, you change them. That's as far as I go for introduction today. Alan, I think you're the one.
Thanks, Luke. So I want to talk to you about the 6.0 R2 release of PowerCLI, which recently came out. It says technical preview at the top because it was a technical preview in San Francisco. It's now released. You can download it, and you can use it with your vSphere environment. You can use it all the way back to 5.0 update 3, so don't worry about the version that's on the PowerCLI. It's fully backwards compatible, and we make sure that we maintain that backwards compatibility. I definitely recommend you download the latest version and use that in your environment if you can, because it's got all the great new functionality, it's got all the bug fixes, it's got all the improvements, so just make sure you download that and you use it if you're 5.0 update 3 or more. You can see the blue circles. We cover a lot of different things in PowerCLI, as you know. We've covered a lot of the products from VMware, and in this release we've gone one step further again. We're covering things like vRealize Operations Manager. How many people have actually asked me for that? At the end of this session, I normally say, what do you want next? And you know, last year everybody was like VR Ops. Did you guys ask for that last year? Yep, a few people. So we're also covering a lot more of the environment as well in this latest release. Some of the storage features like VASA, NFS, VIO, and some more of the vCloud Air environments as well, because with PowerCLI you can also reach out into the cloud and use it against vCloud Air. And we also went into vCenter and of course made some adjustments there to bring even more goodness to the PowerCLI in vSphere. So I'm going to take you through some of this information and actually show you what we've done to update these. So the first thing I want to talk about is the commandlets for vRealize Operations. Again, this is one of the things that people were asking me for. My job as a product manager really is to relay your thoughts and the things that you want back to the engineering team. They're the guys that do the hard work. They're the smart guys. I'm the pretty face. You're not supposed to laugh at that point. You're supposed to nod in agreement. So yeah, you know, I take these features back to them, and as I said at VMworld, I got a lot of people that said, okay, you know, we love working with this stuff, but we also know there's a lot of rich information inside vRealize Operations, and we want to get hold of that. We want to work with the information that's in there and actually collate some of the data, maybe look at some of the alerts, find out what's going on. Why is my my VM dead? Why is my data store dead? And then actually use PowerCLI to react on some of those alerts. So you can see in the VROps commandlets, we've actually got a lot of different commandlets for working with alerts, for working with users, for obviously working with statistics, being able to pull back that rich information that's in there, and then for working with recommendations as well. And we also translate those back to the vSphere objects as well, which makes it a very nice, natural interface to use PowerCLI against. You'll see that in the demonstration I show in a moment. So some of the examples are on the screen here and a list of the commandlets that we've produced. I recommend if you have Operations Manager, download it, start giving it a go. You know, these are just here for your information. I won't go through how each one of those works, because what I want to do is go through the demonstration that will give you a better overview of how that actually works. Okay, so you can see on the screen here, what I've actually got is my PowerShell ISE Console, the free script editor that comes with Windows. And I've loaded a script in there where I've done some examples on how to use the VROps commandlets. So we've got our console at the bottom where we can work interactively in the script pane at the top. So let's go through some of these. So first of all, if we do a get command and we list just the module for VROps, we can see how many new commandlets and what they are for working with VROps. You can see we've got a bunch of new commandlets in there for working with it. And the first thing that you'll obviously want to do is connect to your infrastructure. So everybody's used to doing a Connect VI server, connecting to the virtual infrastructure server, and then doing a Connect OM server will connect you to the Operations Manager server. And then, as I said, we're very tightly integrated with the actual commandlets that exist at the moment. Everybody in this room has probably done a get VM at some point, right? You list the virtual machine. Well, in this case, you can actually pipe it straight into the get OM resource commandlet, and that will get you the Operations Manager information about that virtual machine. The kind of basic information you would see in the UI when you first go in there and list a virtual machine. In this case, it's listed our virtual machine called Photon01, and it's listed the resource statistics there, you know, what's the health like? In this case, it's green, and it lists the name and the description as well. So you can see we can run that for all of the virtual machines, and we can instantly see, okay, are my VMs okay? Are they all green? Very easy to do, nothing out of the blue there. And obviously not just virtual machines as well. What about data stores? What about clusters? What about the other objects that exist in there? You can easily list those and pipe those through. And you can see in this case I've got a red on my iSCSI LAN. If I go in the UI, you can see I do indeed have a red. So let's actually look at that and see why that is red. So the first thing I want to do is actually list the ones where they're not green. So let me find that red one, and there it is. Okay, so I've narrowed my search down. So now let's take a look at that and then actually see, okay, well, what's the alerts on this? Why is it red? So now we can actually list it red. In this case, we're just doing a simple get data store with the getom resource where the health is green and then getting the alerts. And at the end there, the FT is the format table, so show me the results as a table on the screen. And you can see our data store has lost connectivity to a storage device. So we instantly know what the issue there and we know that it's critical. We can also, if we don't want to do it that way, if we actually want to just say, okay, well, what's all the alerts in my environment? I don't want to do it via data stores or VMs. List all the alerts. We obviously can run the getom alert on its own and list the alerts that are in our infrastructure. As I said at the start, there's a wealth of information in Operations Manager. Most people want to get hold of things like CPU usage, memory usage over long periods of time or over certain periods of time. Find out what's going on. And you can easily do that by using the commandlets and the getom resource and then piping that through to getom stat. And you can really get granular on that as well. So in this one, we're actually going to list the CPUs where it's greater than 30%, so we know what's going on and whether we have any issues with VMs using all the CPUs from our infrastructure. But obviously these commandlets can get very granular, as I said. You can actually list the commandlets over different amounts of time, and you can pull back the information that you are most interested in and then use that further on in your scripts. I put the example code in here so that if you download the slides after the event, and the slides in this video, by the way, will be on the VMworld site, so you can download it afterwards. You just log in with your account details, and you should find all of the sessions at VMworld there. But if you download it, you've got a list of this here. I will also be putting this on my blog so that you can copy and paste this kind of stuff and start messing around with the commandlets as you need to. We have also updated the storage module. Everybody's doing stuff with storage, and we've got great coverage of storage in our commandlets at the moment. And then in 6.0 R2, we have increased that even more. So you can now work with VASA, you can work with vStorage API commandlets or the VASA providers. You can work with the NFS user accounts, and you can also work even more with I/O filtering. We made some adjustments there. Again, I've put a list of the commandlets on the screen so that you can see what these are, what we've included in the latest release, and also some of the examples as to how you might use these. For example, adding a new VASA provider is very easy, just using the new-VASA provider commandlet and then giving it a provider name and a credentials. Working with NFS is very easy as well. So some of you might know that the NFS commandlets were actually released as a fling earlier this year. Well, you don't need to use those anymore. They're now actually integrated into PowerCLI. So the fling is now will be removed in the near future. The next thing I want to talk about is vCloud Air. I mean, we've been using our resources probably on site, using them with vSphere, but don't forget, in PowerCLI, you can also use it against vCloud Air. And in the previous release, you could use it with your dedicated infrastructure, but in this release we've actually allowed you to hook into your on-demand infrastructure. So you can go to vCloud Air, you can set yourself up an account, and you can use PowerCLI. You can use the same console you're used to, a lot of the same constructs that you're used to, and start scripting against vCloud Air. I mean, the UI has it with a single pane of glass. This is more of a single shell to access both environments. Being able to list the information in both, being able to create virtual machines, being able to manage it like it is on-premise and not know the difference. I have a demonstration of that, a very quick demonstration. So what I'm going to show you here is some basic reporting information. I don't know about you, but when I start out with something new in PowerCLI, I start with the get commandlets, right? They're the ones that are not going to trash my system. They're the ones that I can get used to how this works. You know, I'm not going to accidentally delete all of my VCloud Air virtual machines with a get command. So I always start with the get commands, and normally reporting as well. So, you know, just create an interesting report because I need that information. And with that use case in mind, I had a customer that had VCloud Air resources, and he also had vSphere resources, and they basically wanted to get a list of all the virtual machines that were in both places and correlate that list. Okay, what is the full list of all my virtual machines in both areas? So you can see how we can do that. The first thing that we would do is connect to our virtual infrastructure server, and then you can see we will connect to our public infrastructure server, so our VCloud Air environment. We can then use the commandlets to find out our compute instance and connect to a specific compute instance, and then pull back the information on our virtual machines. So what we're doing here is doing a get VM, and then selecting some of the properties that I'm interested in. Things like the name, the power state, the memory, the number of CPUs, and the guest OS name. And then I'm going to change a few things around as well. I'm actually going to create something called a location, and on the vSphere environment, the location is obviously going to be my cluster where the virtual machine is stored. And I'm going to also add a platform on the end to know whether it's in vSphere or also whether it's in VCloud Air. It sounds like a nice thing to put in my list. So we've done it for the vSphere stuff, but what about the VCloud Air? You can see that we can do a get CIVM, get cloud infrastructure virtual machines, and again, list the properties that I'm interested in. The power state, the memory, the number of CPUs, the guest OS, and in this case, the location will be the org VDC rather than the cluster. And the platform will be the VCloud Air, and then my compute instance. So we should end up with a global list, a single list of all of my virtual machines and the areas that we pulled the information from. Very easy to use in the same shell, very easy to create a report to bring back the information from both places. So we're just going to create a simple array, and then we're going to add both of those lists together so that they're both in the same list. And then we will, first of all, print it out to the screen, so do a format table, list it in a table. You'll see this run. And then we will actually export it into a CSV so that we can use this for reporting purposes and maybe send it around for auditing information or for other types of information. So let's run the script and see what happens. You can see it's connecting to our different infrastructures at the moment. It's connected to VCloud Air now. We'll give it a second because I didn't speed this video up. It's listed all of the virtual machines in our environment to the screen. So now we have a consolidated list of the VMs and the information that we were interested in. And then we have that location and the platform on the end there. So we've also exported that into a CSV file. I just proved to you that I did add the platform because it kind of cut off the end of the screen there. So you can see the platform there. It's obviously listed our virtual center and also our account in VCloud Air. You can see how we can easily then export it to a CSV and start working with that. Hopefully very basic stuff. Anybody that's been using PowerCLI, and if you're in this room, you've probably been using PowerCLI for a little while, you should be able to pick that up and realize, even though I'm moving to VCloud Air, I can still use my scripts, I can still understand how to work with this environment. Again, the code is here for you guys to work with, and it's also on a GitHub repository as well, so if you want to download it, make changes, improve it, then please do. There's one rule I always say about PowerCLI. Never reinvent a script. If it's on someone's site, steal it. The best script you'll ever write is one that you've stolen. 9 times out of 10 from Luke as well. And that was basic reporting, but obviously you can get more advanced as well. Luke asked about VCheck, and this, the screenshot that I have on the screen shows you a different output to VCheck. I basically adjusted VCheck and To be honest, I did this within about 20 minutes. I just wrote some simple functions in there, some simple plugins to use the VCheck framework against VCloud Air. And now you can instantly do a VCloud Air audit and pull back all the information about all of your virtual machines. So you really can get complex with the scripting that you do in that environment, just like you can in your vSphere environment. You can bring up things like the statistics and stuff like that as well. The next improvement in PowerCLI 6.0 R2 that I want to talk about is the host hardware information. Again, this was one of those things that people asked me for. And when we look for features in PowerCLI, I generally talk to a lot of customers at events like this. I go visit customers, we look through the communities, we look at Twitter, we look at blog posts. We really do look at a wealth of different information. And this was one of those things that kept coming up. You know, it's hard to actually work out what's in my host and actually compare that against something like the hardware compatibility list. If I'm going to upgrade to the latest version, I'm not sure 100% what's in each of my hosts. You know, what HBA is in there, what network adapters in there. So getting that network, getting the hardware information is absolutely key. I'm going to show you a quick demonstration on how we do that. Okay, so in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect to my virtual infrastructure server, and I'm going to use the commands to get a list of the information. Now, the commands on the screen should be pretty straightforward for everybody, but I'll walk you through them. We're getting our host, and then we're getting the hosts that are powered on, and then we're getting a list of the hardware that's in there, and then we're skipping the SSL certification checks that come up. So let's run that commandlet first of all and see what kind of information we bring back. And this is the basic kind of information that you want to know about your hosts first of all. So things like the manufacturer, the serial numbers, the asset tags if they're on it, the CPU model, and the number of cores in there. Very basic information. But if I want to get more advanced, we have the get VM host PCI device commandlet. So we'll run this against our host and see what it comes back with. You can see it comes back with a list of the hardware that's actually in our host here, so that we can use that, maybe collate it and search for it in the hardware compatibility list. You know, if the hardware compatibility list was released as an Excel spreadsheet, we would automatically be able to check our hosts, see if they are compliant. So that's something I'm working on getting done. But we can also compare them against each other. We all know that the best hosts to put in a cluster are the hosts that look like each other, that are set up with the same networks, have the same hardware in them. You'll get a lot less errors if you do that. Well, we can compare them very easily using PowerCLI to work out that we've got the same hardware in them. In my case, I've only got two here. You know, it's a very simple example. You can obviously change this to your needs. But we're just going to put both of those inside an object, and then we're going to use compare object to see if there's any differences in the hardware between my two hosts that I have in my cluster. So we'll run this, and you should see the information come back, and I've told it to show me all the information, and where you see the double equals on the end, it exists in both objects. So, you know, I'm a good admin or a good nerd because this is actually my home environment. You can see that both of my hosts look exactly the same, and I have the same hardware in them. Fantastic. One of the other updates that we've made to PowerCLI 6.0 R2 was before, when you were working with Update Manager, you used to have to download a separate installable version of the Update Manager commandlets. And even worse than that, you used to have to download the Update Manager commandlets that were specific for your Update Manager version. Now, we had customers that had maybe several environments with different versions of Update Manager on them. So managing that kind of environment meant you needed a version of PowerShell or a PowerShell host for each one of these with the different versions of Update Manager installed. It just got very complicated very fast. So in this release, we've doubled back. We've made sure that we not only include the Update Manager commandlets as part of the PowerCLI installer now, so one-stop shop, just go through, install it, and you have the Update Manager commandlets, but also we've made sure that we have gone back to version 5.5 of Update Manager in this case, so that you can use it with the latest versions or 5.5. So you don't need to make sure that you install the version that's compatible with your update manager. If you are on a version that's less than 5.5, then you will actually not need to install Update Manager and still download that version. My apologies for that, but we obviously can't go back and support all of the circumstances too far because I have limited resources. I'm now going to hand you over to Luke, who's going to start getting deep and start talking about desired state configuration.
Thank you, Alan.
Sorry.
What I really love is how they keep expanding the possibilities that you have in PowerCLI, but what we shouldn't forget, since PowerCLI is plugged in or situated on top of PowerShell, there's a lot of features that the PowerShell team from Microsoft is introducing all the time. And one of these new features that they introduced in PowerShell version 4, and which they expanded quite a lot in 5 is not officially released, but there's a pre-production release. How many of you are using the pre-production release or looking at it already? The 5, quite a few. Okay, so the features that you have in there for working with desired state configuration are expanded quite enormously compared to the version 4 availability. Now, desired state configuration, for those who don't know, what is it? It's in fact a configuration tool which automates. The famous catchphrase that Jeffrey Snover used to coin is the one at the bottom there, make it so. This is, of course, a reference to Star Trek, where Commander Riker says, or the other one, Picard says to Riker, make it so. What it does is you define at one point how your environment should look, your servers, the number of servers, and so on, how they should be configured. And this thing looks at regular intervals at your configuration. If there is a deviation from your configuration, it will correct it. It will make it so that it becomes, again, what you configured or defined in the configuration. Now, why did they introduce this in PowerShell 5? The reason is quite simple. Most of our environments start to become quite big. And the complexity of managing all that, you have your Windows server with a web server, a SQL on there, you have other servers with SharePoint. The complexity becomes quite enormous as well. So if you multiply this scale with your complexity of each of your servers, it will be very hard to manage, especially in these days where most of the enterprises are downsizing the manpower. So you better start automating your environment, at least that part of the environment. Now, what would you need if you want to play with desired state configuration? Of course, at the moment, the best thing to use is PowerShell version 5, because in 4, the possibilities are rather limited. There's a lot more in 5 that you can use for configuring your environment. There's 2 ways of pushing these configurations to your machines. You can push, like I just said. That means you make a configuration and you just push it to the agent running on your target machine. The other way of doing it is with a pull setup. That means you have a central server that can be a web server, that can be an SMB share, a file share, and you drop your configurations or your updated configurations on there, and the agent on all your servers will regularly pull in the new configuration, see if it is changed, and do the necessary actions. The big thing that intrigued me, of course, since I've been playing with desired state configuration, is how can I use this in a vSphere environment? Now, on ASXi, there is no console anymore. You're not allowed, or you're not supposed to run agents on there. So how should we be using DSC in a vSphere environment? Now, luckily, there was a solution that I published already some time ago for a View environment before they started incorporating or thinking of expanding the possibilities with Air and so on. What you do there is you make a kind of helper server. This is a schematic that comes, in fact, from a blog post I did on that. The one at the top right is this famous engine machine. That's the one that will actually run your configurations, because there you have installed PowerCLI. It will be the one that is pulling in your DSC configuration, and it will connect to your vSphere server. That can be a vCenter, that can be an ESXi server. The bottom part, that's just a workstation where you make or you create your definitions and you push them to the pull server. So the concept is quite simple. I listed for clarity, because I think most of you can't read those, a few of the commandments that you would use and a few of the keywords that are important of these files that you use in your DSC setup. Now, how does this look? And I know this is practically illegible at the back of the room, but just to give you an idea, what they did in 4, you really had to define all these properties hand by hand. What they do, or still are doing, they're publishing modules, which are available on the module service at the moment, which is also new. You can just download them from a commandlet. What they do is they allow you to define in your configurations each of these properties, if it's a key, if it's obligatory, if it's an optional value, if it's a limited set of values. So the definition of all these resources that go in your configuration files is quite easy, reasonably easy to do, not very easy, of course. Then in the end, if you want to create your own custom resource, which we will have to do for your vSphere environment, you will have to make a custom scripted resource. There's always, in a custom scripted resource, there's always 3 functions that you have to provide. The first one is, and it's not the order that they're listed here, the first one, the important one, is your test function. What that will do is it will look at your configuration file, look at the actual situation, and return true or false. Is that exactly what is happening or running in my environment? And send that back to the DSC agent. If it's not the case, the DSC agent, the LCM agent in fact, he will call the second function, which is the set function. Okay, the name gives it away. That one will actually make the change so that your new configuration will correspond with what you actually configured in your DSC configuration file. And the last one, the get function, it's not used in verifying your configuration. What they do there is you have a commandlet where you can pull in your actual configuration. That's where this get function is called by the agent. So it's quite simple. What goes in the functions, that of course is a bit more complicated depending which resources you actually want to do. Now, if this agent that I mentioned, the LCM agent, if you have this running, in our case it would be running on this engine machine, what you see it doing there, and there's 3 big differences. The first part, the red box, that's the one where he will check the configuration he has at that point in time with the one that is available on the pull server. If it's not the same, he will pull in the new one. The second one, that's the one where he will do the testing. And you see I put a yellow box around it as well. He will return true or false. If he sees that it's not the same as what is in your configuration file, he will tell the LCM agent it's false. Based on that response, he will call the third part, that's the green box, where he will actually change the configuration, the make it so part. That's where your configuration will get changed to correspond again with what you configured for your environment or your resource. I think we have a small video. What I did here, this is one of my lab environments. It's in the cloud, independent of the provider. So what we have here, we have a number of servers. It's a very straightforward Active Directory environment. There's a domain controller. There is this pull server, which runs nothing more than, in fact, than an HTTP web server. There is the famous engine machine, which is just the Windows box in this case. I have a workstation, and I have, of course, a vCenter in there. This is looking at these 3 functions that I just mentioned. What I did is I made an example here with folders. So all the folders, blue or yellow ones in your environment, can be tested, created with these 3 DSC functions. So what I do is I call this engine, and that will actually execute the testing or the setting of your environment. So that's what you see here. That's where I call this CIW function. That's the one that actually goes in a remote session to that engine and check if your vSphere resource is still in the correct state or the desired state. Now, this has to be packaged in a module. Everything in PowerShell is module. Most of everything is in PowerShell is in modules, hint, hint. The way that DSC knows is with this version number that you give there. So it's very important if you do an update to your code, change the version number. This is a small script that I wrote, which will now compile your new model. It has to be in a specific, it has to be in a zip format. You have to create a checksum in there, and you have to push it to your pull server. And this is now an actual configuration file. what we see in here is the separation between what and where. So we define in the resource, one of them, we define the what, that's in this case 3 folders, if you look very closely, and there's the where, that will tell you on which machines, in this case it's our vCenter, where you want to apply this configuration. Now I go back, so we push that one to the pool server as well, with the updated module. Now, normally, the LCM agent, the minimum interval that it will run is 15 minutes. Now, if you're developing this stuff, you don't want to wait 15 minutes every time. So there is it's semi-documented WMI function that you can call, which will push your LCM agent to do a refresh immediately. What you will see at the bottom, since I specified verbose on there, is you will see the different test phases where you will actually be checking each of these resources that we defined earlier, and he will check if the actual situation is that way as we specified it. If it's not, that's the false that is returned. He will call the set function to create, in this case, the folders. So this runs a bit of time. You shouldn't make these functions too long, because then you risk falling into the next interval, of course. And at the end, when we are finished, or the LCM agent is finished, okay, this is where I point out what he is actually doing. This is one example with one of the resources. He is first checking if the folder is there with the test function. It's not, he calls the set function to change it. Now we're going to the vCenter, because this better had done something, so otherwise all our stuff would be in vain. And as you can see, we have 2 folders here, 2 yellow folders that have been created due to this run of the LCM agent. And the third one, just to show that it's possible, is a blue folder that we created. So with this way, you can easily configure your complete environment. This was just an example for a folder, but you can do this for data centers, for VMs, even for clusters, introducing new ESXi nodes in your environment. Big advantage is you have everything in this configuration file, which you can put under version control if need be. So you have a really documented environment, and I hesitate to use the word, but this is your first step to a DevOps environment if you start using this kind of configuration management. By the way, I will start publishing most of these resources on GitHub, so you can have a look. And I was hoping, since I didn't obviously do all the resources, because vSphere is a rather complex environment, I hope that there will be some community contribution with some of these resources that I see coming in on the GitHub. Now, another thing that is quite important, and which they also introduced in PowerShell 4, and you see more and more applications, even hardware, they are available nowadays with REST interfaces. So they provide you a REST API. Now, PowerShell is quite easy. It is quite easy to work with this REST API. Now, why would you use that? It's a lot easier than calling straightforward CLIs. I know you're doing CLIs, but in this case, we want to do everything from within our PowerShell environment. There's a few things that you would need if you start writing REST API functions in PowerShell. I just mentioned a few. There are others, but that's the ones that I'm using at the bottom there. In Chrome, you can there's an add-on which is called an advanced REST client. It will allow you to simulate REST calls or execute them and see the results coming back. It beats, for example, using Fiddler, which is really a network tool where you really have to send it and inspect the packages that are coming back from your environment. So if you're using REST interfaces or starting to use REST functions, you better have a few tools that could help you in the development there. There are a few remarks, special things, the way that JSON, because most of the data is in JSON format, the date time, for example, is not easily converted to a PowerShell date time. But I wrote a function for that, which I will publish as well. And as Alan already said, don't reinvent the wheel, just take my code and use it in your functions. I have no problem whatsoever with that. We have a small video where we will show How this could be used, for example, with your VRO environment. First of all, I want to show you these functions I just mentioned, where we convert the dates, the JSON dates, which are, like most Unix environments, based on January 1st, 1970, which is not as easy to convert for PowerShell at least. So there's a couple of functions that you can include in whatever module or function or script that you're writing. The standard conversion from JSON to PowerShell objects is built into PowerShell. You have the convert to and from JSON. But for the dates, you have to take special action. Otherwise, it won't be a date that you can interpret or compare with regular dates. This just shows you a few examples how the function is called. I suppose that the videos will appear in the session as well when they are published, so you can have a look. We're not going to run through them line by line. This is an example how a JSON date would look. It's the number of milliseconds or ticks, I don't even remember, since January 1st, 1970. So you have to convert there, and that's what the function in this case would be doing for you. So you see, we do the complete object that is returned with a convert from JSON, but for the dates in there, and you have to know which properties are date-time properties, of course, those you will have to do by calling the function we just mentioned. And it goes the other way around. If you want to feed something, input into your REST API, you will have to do the same thing. This is the VRO example that I just mentioned. It's quite easy you look at the REST API reference guide, and there's a number of functions in there. It's fill in the blanks. You see the REST APIs, you see what parameters you have to pass. Just send it to the REST interface of the VRO and you will get your results back. And all that is done with this very straightforward invoke REST method that PowerShell provides you. In this case, we just looked, it's a complex object, that is one thing. So you will have to interpret and go into the object to actually get the data out there that would be of interest. That's what I'm doing here. So in the result, in this case, we are looking at the number of plugins installed in your VRO environment. So instead of starting up the client, the web interface or the client, you can just do it from a script and check which plugins are there. You see the version, the date when they were published, and so on. So another level of your vSphere environment that you can automate through PowerShell/PowerCLI. Just a cross-check, we got some plugins that were returned by this function. Now we're going to actually look in the VRO client, and we saw, I think it's already done, we saw that the same number and with the same dates and same versions was returned. This is the reference guide that you can easily find for VRO. This contains all the REST APIs that are available for that product. And most products with the REST API, they will provide something similar. Like I said, it's fill in the blanks. You look at the parameters, you look at the objects that are returned, and you handle them in your script. So again, something that you can easily automate in this case. This is this plugin in Chrome where you can simulate, you can actually see, fill in, type in your parameters to a specific call and see the result coming back. For debugging purposes, this is an ideal tool if you're serious about programming with PowerShell against REST APIs. What I also did is you can programmatically in your functions, if you're using Fiddler, you can redirect your calls to Fiddler. So you don't have to have Fiddler running all the time. You just change the proxy address. And at the moment when you call that, all your calls will now go through Fiddler, which is a network trace program. And that means it doesn't have to be on all the time. You won't be flooded with messages from other products going on the network. This one will only, because you did it in your function, only show what you actually called in this script here. So a very handy tool if you're debugging. For the ones that have never seen Fiddler, it's like I said, it's a network kind of tracing. It acts as a proxy, and it will show you all the packages that are sent and returned in your web traffic. You can look at them in the raw format, you can look at them in the JSON format, and so on. I think that's the end. That was the input. This is the returned result. Okay. Again, these functions that we just showed in the demo, they are there for your reference if you're looking at the slides later on. What we always do in our sessions in the last years is we have some very practical best practices. And what we tend to do is look at the last months and see what appeared in the communities. How many of you know that there is a VMTN PowerCLI community? I hope most of you, in fact. Okay. If you have a question or if you're looking for a specific script, there's good probability somebody already did it. So it's not only my side. Have a look in the VMTN PowerCLI community. There's a lot of answers there as well. In this case, what I wanted to show, this was a very practical question. It's a guy who had standard vSwitches in his environment, and he wanted to create new ones. But instead of having gaps in the number, most of us, they have vSwitch 1, vSwitch 2, vSwitch 3. He wanted to see or find, with the script, the next available number. Now, you can do this in multiple ways, but what I wanted to show here is that if you're serious about your PowerShell/PowerCLI coding, you should start learning regular expressions. You can't really live without them. So in this case, this is a short example how you can use regular expressions to find from the existing vSwitches the suffixes that are there, and from that deduce what the next available suffix in your VSS switch name would be. Code is included. If you want to use it, have a look later at the slides. Alan.
So one of the questions I get when people start using PowerCLI and they get to a point where they're quite comfortable with PowerCLI, they start using something called GetView. How many people in the room have looked at GetView, know what GetView is? Kind of, okay, I know that. Okay, good. So this is one of those places where people get stuck and they're like, okay, what is this GetView? How does it really work? Why do I need to use it? So I'd like to talk about it a little bit because this is a deep dive session, obviously. And I want to talk a little bit about GetView. Now, the way that we generally create stuff in the PowerCLI team is we would cover the entire API through something that we call .NET Views. So it's actually a representation of the entire API in a .NET format, basically. So what we're doing here is we're saying, whatever you want to do in PowerCLI that's in the public API in vSphere, you can do it. And that is a true statement. It is harder, as you can see. So when we use the GetView commandlet, all it's doing is accessing the .NET views of our API. And you can see that whether it's vSphere or whether there's a commandlet that uses it against VROps, or whether there's a commandlet that uses it against SRM, or some of the other products that we cover as well. So the first thing we do is obviously create the GetView, and you can view the entire API, as I said. But there's issues with that. I mean, that's not for everybody. PowerCLI was designed and PowerShell was designed to be for the system administrators, not the programmers. I mean, the programmers can probably look at this code on the screen here and understand exactly what it's doing. And if you look through our API and you've used the GetView commandlet enough times, you can probably also look at this and understand that we're just adjusting the resource configuration of a virtual machine. Now, this isn't for everybody, and this is exactly why we create our commandlets, our high-level commandlets. These are the ones that kind of abstract that hard bit of code right there and come up with the commandlets that make sense to us. If I'm using the vSphere API, do I really want to learn how to create a new virtual machine, which, by the way, takes about 200 lines of code in the API, or do I want to run new VM? Number one. So yeah, you know, using these commandlets and abstracting these commandlets is really what we try and do to make everybody's lives easier. But we also give you that backdoor, that GetView way to access your infrastructure. You can see the code for setting the VM resource configuration is a lot easier than the actual .NET code, but we still give you that way to access it. And we do that for a couple of reasons. It's faster. GetView is faster because GetView, you're doing something that's very targeted. You're actually, you know what you're doing. You're after a certain piece of information, or you're calling a certain API, a certain method, and you know exactly what you want to do. the getVM commandlet and the other commandlets that we create are higher level commandlets, are that more abstracted but easier to work with, and therefore a little bit slower. We also have something called extension data. So extension data is basically another way to access the view information. Now, not all of the information is returned as a root property of your objects. So what we do again is we add this extension data property. So if I do a get VM in brackets and then dot extension data, it'll actually give me the view object or the .NET object view of that virtual machine. And therefore, again, you can access all the information that you need. And the reason I explain this is to, try and demystify a little bit about how GetView works, because I do get a lot of questions about how does this work, when should I use it? And I just generally say, if you know what you're doing with GetView and you want to write your code in a more advanced way, then that's absolutely fine. But remember, you're not the only person that's going to be running that code. There's probably somebody else that may pick it up afterwards. If you get hit by a bus, for example, somebody else has got to come in and read your script. Which one of these do you think they'll understand? The second one, right? If you're going to be sharing it on a blog, you obviously want to see the second one. And I love the high-level commandlets because you can read them. They're almost English. I can understand this. I can read this code. Often, if I'm learning how to use a new feature in vSphere, I'll actually write some PowerCLI against it and start reading that code rather than working with it in the UI, because it's a lot easier for me to understand in this format. So I've shown you how to do this, but Luke's actually shown you, Luke will go a little bit deeper now and show you if you are creating the new objects and using the GetView version, where do you look? How do you do that kind of stuff? How do you get started?
Okay, thanks. I do appreciate all these high-level commands, and I prefer to use them. Perhaps it's useful as well to mention the 80-20. They try to cover most of your requirements. That's the 80% that they want to cover with these high-level. Sometimes you have very specific needs, a special VMDK connected to your VM and so on. That's where you would go into this low-level GetView-like stuff. Now, the basic question that we see a lot there is, how do you find this? Now, there are two ways to find that information. The first one is the standard, the classical one, that is read a reference. You go to bed every night, you read 5 pages. Next day you need to read the next, and there's only 600 of them, so in a year you would be finished and you would know the API reference by heart. That's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it, and that's something that they introduced some time ago, was with the Onyx project. With the Onyx project that intercepted your SOAP packets that were transmitted in the background by these high-level PowerCLI commandlets, and they showed you what they actually were calling for API methods. Now, unfortunately, with the introduction of the web client, that stopped. We didn't have an interface there until recently, and they brought out, is it a Fling or official?
It's a Fling.
It's a Fling. So they have now the web client.
Onyx for the web client.
Onyx for the web client. So now you can have a plugin in your web client and you can do the same thing as you had been doing with the Onyx standalone in the past. So you can again look at what APIs are behind each of these high-level commandlets. Now, just a small example of how this would work. The first method which I mentioned is you go into your API reference, which is a book online available. You start looking at the managed object. That's most of the times a good starting point. That's where everything starts in your vSphere environment. You do a bit of educated guessing looking around. In this case, we were looking at distributed virtual switches. We were looking at a specific method. In this case, it was a method to switch. Wait, which one did we use? I can't even read it. Okay, for the check configuration script. So you find that method. So it's just doing a find on those web pages. That's what I mean here. You just do a Control F and you type part of the keys or keywords or metadata that you're looking for. You find it. You go further. You click in with these are all hyperlinks. You go to the method. You see how to call it, from what is the parent object, what parameters you have to pass, and then you have this method itself where you have two flavors. They did a binding of all these methods with two flavors. The one ending with task are similar to the run async commandlets. The ones without the task, they wait till the method is finished. Okay, once you have that information, it's quite easy, and you're a happy cat because you now did an API call for your problem that you had. This was, in fact, an example where you didn't have a commandlet to actually set that, at least not in the version where I checked this thing. The second method, that is your, like we just mentioned, that is Onyx for the web client. It's a plugin, so what you will see once you install it is a fling. You will have two small buttons at the top of your browser. One is for the recording. So you start recording your actions that you actually do from the web client, what you're looking for, the code. You start the recording. Once you have your recording, you click on the PowerCLI button, the second button, and you will get this code in your window. So once you have this code, it's easy, relatively easy to adapt in your own script, because this is actually with fixed values, with fixed pointers in there, so you will have to do a bit of editing. And since we know that not all of you are cat lovers, we included a small dog puppy as well.
So how many of you would use the documentation method of looking for it and going through all those steps? A couple of people, I bet they're VMware engineers. And how many people of you would use Onyx for the web client? Yeah, me too.
Okay, I think we come to the end.
Yeah, I want to thank you for attending the session. We do have Q&A. They have microphones that they'll bring around to you if you have questions. And I want to remind you, it's places like this, when I get feedback, that we take directly and introduce into future releases. Maybe not the next release, maybe not the release after that, but one day we get around to it. It's all added into the backlog. I would love to hear from you what you're missing. What do we need to do next? What do we need to cover? Also, for those of you that are leaving now to get to the party, good on you, buy me a beer. Fill out your survey. Please do fill out the survey. There's nothing we can do about our accents, so please don't make a comment asking us to change our accents. It's very hard to do. But please do fill out the survey. Luke, what's your favorite number, by the way?
Which number?
5?
5, yeah,
like 5?
of course.
I like 5 as well, just for your information.
Eventually 4.9, we can live with that.
4 to 9, okay. So questions, who has a question? We have a question at the front. Because I don't think the mic's on.
Can you hear me over the mic? Oh,
there we go.
now.
Thank you.
Thanks. Regarding the new hardware commandlets,
yes.
Do they show firmware information?
Okay, so the new hardware commandlets, do they show firmware information? No, I don't believe they do, actually. That would be nice. I don't think the hooks are there for actually look at the firmware information for us to do that. But
they're in the client. If you go to hardware information
through the SIM data.
Yeah. You will have to do the SIM calls for that.
That's a good question. I don't think I've looked at it in that much detail, but I believe that we are pulling the SIM information. So I'll double check the commandlets. But if it's in the SIM and it's in the information in your web client, then it should retrieve it in the commandlets as well.
Just to conclude the use cases, HP publishes best practice firmware versions, so
of course.
You programmatically compare, okay, I need to go patch these servers.
Yeah, thank you.
Any others? There's one in the middle. Oh, there, okay.
Yep.
Would the GetView command always be quicker than the command that's the more high-level ones?
Oh, that's a good question. Yes, at the moment it will be. It's targeted. Remember, you're actually going and saying, get me this exact information, and you're kind of pushing a server-side filter, so all the processing's been done on the server. So yeah, it will be at the moment. You know, one of the things I hear from feedback is that certain commandlets that we do use are slow. So GetVM, for example, if you run that in an environment that has 40,000 virtual machines, it's going to take a couple of minutes to bring back that information, collate the objects, put it all into PowerCLI objects, and then return that to the screen. We are looking at ways to speed things up in that case. But at the moment, yes, GetView is always faster, but again, you need that better understanding of how to use it and your code isn't always as nice and as pretty as it needs to be? Good question. Another question in the middle?
Is vRealize automation planned for PowerCLI?
Good question. As far as I'm concerned, I want every VMware application to have PowerCLI. I want you to be able to use one shell to access everything. I'm certainly in talks with the product manager, so I'm talking to them about how they would introduce PowerCLI. But if everybody else wants vRealize automation, it would help me if you also spoke to the vRealize automation product managers and told them that as well. I'm the kind of guy that would go to them and push them to do this stuff, but I'm one person asking them to cover PowerCLI. So I don't want to say no, I just want to say not yet.
Yesterday I heard about a new feature
Hi.
that may or may not be part of a future release of the web client. It was an integration of PowerCLI and the possibility to offer scripts directly to the web client users.
Yep.
Any details about this feature?
Yeah, so you're talking about a feature that we actually released as a fling. It's an awesome fling. Check out Power Actions. If you Google Power Actions or go to vmware.com/flings, I think it is, you'll find Power Actions. And that is a really awesome web client plugin where you can basically right-click on a virtual machine and you can add a PowerShell script to run. There's a bunch of other stuff in there as well, like sharing scripts between people, and you can actually run PowerCLI directly through the web client as well, so Mac and Linux people can do it. But yeah, check it out. It's a fling at the moment.
Okay. And which credentials will be used? Will the current logged-in user credentials be invoked?
Yeah.
Okay.
It uses your current logged-on credentials that you use to log onto the web client.
And it's limited to all the privileges that user has. So if you have a script that tries to do something which the user is not allowed to, it will fail. Okay.
Great question, thank you. Everybody, please do check out Power Actions. I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Microsoft is implementing often in their GUI fronts where you can configure something. Often the feature that you get the PowerShell script, what you're doing by clicking now, that you have the script for documented, for change management, for develop own script, something like that. Is that planned as a fling or something like that for the web GUI?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, obviously Microsoft has the added benefit of being, most of their GUIs are written on top of PowerShell. So it's very easy and very natural for them to do that. If I'm going to go to VMware and tell them that we now need to base all of our GUIs off of PowerShell, I'm probably not going to get too far. That's why we introduce things like the fling for, Onyx for the web client, being able to actually do it slightly different, record what I'm doing, go and do something, stop recording, give me the code. The end result is the same, you get the code, but it's slightly harder to work with.
You get the code for the views, but not the normal PowerShell command.
Exactly right, yeah. So that's great feedback to me. You're basically saying to me, this is good, but give me those higher level commandlets so that I can reuse those rather than the low level ones. It's definitely something that we can look at. I can't promise anything, but it's good feedback. Thank you. We have a question at the back.
Hello, thanks for the great work with PowerCLI. I've been using it for absolutely ages and it's helped me in a number of tricky situations, but I've gotten to the point now where I'm having to refocus on some REST API usage, and I was wondering, is there a way to take all the work that I'm sure many of us have done in the past with PowerCLI and translate that to produce REST API queries and commands doing the same tasks that we did in PowerCLI? Like you mentioned with Onyx, a way to convert between the two presentation languages, if you will.
That's a good question. I obviously don't know the content of your scripts, what you're hooking into. I'm assuming it's vSphere?
Of course, yes. I was implying like PowerCLI scripts, so standard activities, VMs, hosts, virtual switches, and so forth. Yeah.
So I don't know if you know this, but vSphere doesn't actually have a REST API at the moment, or it has a very limited REST API that came out in 6.0 that only covers content library and tagging. So it's actually a SOAP API.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's fine. So you can't generate the REST because there isn't a REST API, but you can use something like Onyx to generate the pure .NET code. And in the older versions of Onyx, we actually generated pure SOAP and also JavaScript for vRealize operations.
Yeah, I remember going back to the old version of Onyx and finding it was crashing on newer vCenter versions.
It does,
so
yeah.
vSwitch versions on the newer version of vCenter,
Yep.
and so I couldn't generate the code for that vSwitch.
I totally understand. Yeah. It's something that we need to look into, whether we can expand Onyx for the web client to actually do exactly the same thing. I know that we can do it, but getting the resources and finding the time to actually release that as a fling is the bit that we need to do.
There's no shortcut then? That's just one.
I can't think of any shortcut. The only shortcut that I can think of is using something like Fiddler, like Luke explained, which will be your kind of man in the middle that will translate it back to the raw SOAP calls as well. And Luke's got a great article on his website that shows you actually how to use Fiddler to do that kind of stuff.
And there will be an update because the new version of Fiddler has a lot more possibilities. And I will include that code where you specific scripts can redirect them via Fiddler, which is nothing more than a local proxy, in fact.
So we've been given the get out of here.
Yeah, I'm afraid our time is up.
So thank you very much for attending. I really appreciate it.
Thanks.